Immediately after that campaign was released, it became very popular, the over-packaging to cover the tobacco packaging. Some of them very simple, paper-based, with colorful flowers or just regular patterns on it. Some of them using more finer materials. Even very sophisticated cases of fashion luxury brands with their brands on it. I would say these were, in a way, design solutions. And they were basically trying to cover, in a defensive way, a specific behavior from those consuming tobacco and possibly dealing or not dealing very well with those images from an emotional perspective. Would you say this is a counter-nudge? And I'm not going into the ethics.
So if I understand correctly, you're asking if this way of covering the cigarette packages is a counter-nudge. When we did that study, okay, it was very clear from the beginning that people that already smoked, okay, avoided to look at the pictures. So we knew that it wouldn't be very effective for that kind of people. The main target of that intervention was people that they wanted to smoke or they just were starting to smoke, particularly young smokers. Now, something we haven't really told during the presentation is that nudges are effective, but they don't produce massive changes in terms of behavior. What I mean is, they might affect only a small percentage of people, but still it's a good way to intervene, given that usually they cost very little to implement. So the idea of adding pictures to the cigarette packs was, compared to other way of intervening, a relatively small cost. And even if 5% of young people between 18 and whatever, they didn't take up the addiction of smoking because of that, that was still a good investment. Now, so the fact that now people can cover these things or ignore them, it was something to take into account. Also because another issue we discussed was that probably no nudges last forever. What I mean is they have a sort of decay effect. This is something that is really an issue in behavioral research, in the sense that it's very difficult to measure for how long a nudge is effective unless you track continuously the effectiveness of this nudge. This is now possible to do it online. For example, they do it in the gambling because they continuously record what people are doing. So they can continually adjust what the interface should look like and so on. That applies also to social media platform. Facebook every now and then changes the design of his app or the home page. The same does Twitter and the others. And why they do that? Because they accumulate data and they see, okay, if we change this, people stay longer on our platform, this is what we want, and so on. So just to get back to the initial question is, I think that there's not necessarily counter-nudging. I think it's some kind of coping mechanism that people might have. Now, if it would have been the industry promoting, giving extra, way of covering that, that probably would be a counter-nudge. But let me add that we knew from the beginning, but it was politically not possible, that the best combination would have been the plain package, which is now adopted in Australia. So that's the secret. UK also. And also UK now. At that time, it was only Australia that was launching it, which is the cigarette pack with just a plain name of the brand, without any of the logos or the sort of graphical elements that would people recognize for example, Marlboro from other brands. That plus the pictures was the best combination. But because there was no consensus on the plain package in terms of political support, we only could implement the plain package. So in that respect, with the plain package, I think it would have been even stronger, the effect.
Just to add that when I showed the picture of the package of cigarette targeting women, basically what the industry did, it changed social norms. At the beginning of the 20th century, it was not well accepted that women smoked. Now it's normal, okay? And it's not only the tobacco industry, but the tobacco industry worked together with other trends. So basically the hypothesis behind the labels of the tobacco is also to increase social stigma and try to contribute to the change in norms. And so the people who cover it are, for me, it was a reactive, a sort of a reactive strategy to avoid the stigma. But on the other hand, I think I saw a lot of places selling this at the beginning, but I don't see them. And so I think the people smokers have simply got used to those pictures. But the picture still stays there, so they affect the non-smoker that see this. This is the basis hypothesis. But we do not know that if in the end it will be effective or not.
I was just going to, to back up what you said, I noticed that, I don't know if it's stopped now, but some tobacco companies manufacture little boxes with their logo on the box that were just shaped the same size as cigarettes. And obviously you could use them for anything you wanted, but most people used them to store cigarettes. Were you aware of that?
No.
No, I think they were banned, but they did do it.
Banned.
Mm. Yeah, cigarette boxes. That's a counter nudge.
Any other?
Yeah.
Hey there. I have a question for each one of you, actually, if that's possible. It's going to be brief. So, I don't remember your names, actually, but... Cristiano, right. You were just telling us about these 4 cases that you were working at and trying to find how to address them, yeah? And you were actually talking about 2 possible ways, like finding a solution or going for the banning of those problems. What I'm actually wondering, and it's what I'm wondering all the time, it's like, it's probably commonplace, but why don't we go one step backwards, and why don't we just start with education? I mean, instead of trying to find a solution or banning stuff, why don't we just teach children while they are in school, or these people while they are going through education, how to deal with these kind of things? I mean, wouldn't that be the best solution, actually?
So, I answer. Then you have the other question.
Yeah.
This is a very good question, because there is a debate in the literature about those who are in favor of nudge and those who are against. Some claim there is manipulation, and actually some psychologists, among them this German psychologist Giger Renzer, who is maybe is a bit not so happy that Kahneman won the Nobel Prize, but he suggests that is a defeat to just work on the restraining forces and not trying to educate. That a democratic society should try to do both, no? Not only using the cheap nudge, but also trying to do mobilization campaign, education campaign. On the other hand, and personally, in emotion, I would tend to agree with that approach, more Habermasian approach, communicative action in society. On the other hand, I mean, the evidence shows that this type of educational and awareness campaign are costly and not that effective. So to some extent, it's like at a certain point, like Thaler and Sunstein, they say, okay, we have to improve the life of Americans. These other things, they don't work. Let's try with this cheap nudge that may work. So, but I agree that one could try also to go one step before and work on, on education. But for instance, with kids that they play so fast, etc., how can you tell them, oh, look, this is money, you're buying, it's very difficult. It is very difficult.
I think the difficult part is that these, let's say, negative nudge, okay, appeal to the automatic way of thinking, okay? Education normally would appeal to the reflexive one. So the only way how you could deal with this, you should teach children, okay, how to shift from automatic to reflexive, to be very critical. But any developmental psychologist will tell you that that's not how the brain of kids at that age is. You just can't. So you have a problem there that's why Cristiano was saying that they're not effective, is that you cannot. Of course, there are some differences depending on what you're teaching and how and what is the topic. So it's not completely useless, no. But it's very difficult to educate not to follow automatic behavior that any of us, including adults, have. I mean, they have to be some kind of Zen masters when they were kids that could control exactly how they think and how they do it. And we don't do it. I mean, adults, we don't do it. So just because they start, sure, I mean, you can make them aware. I mean, the case of persuasion of online, this is a typical case. You can make kids aware of the fact that out there are actors, they want to manipulate them because they want them to sell junk food or whatever. It doesn't, however, shield them to the fact that if they see a characters in a game that is actually a product, and then ask later between two products which one they want, they will pick up the one that unconsciously they've seen in that game. And so
the second question for...
Yeah. About the gaming and gambling for the mom. Once again, I mean, if these companies are actually applying gambling techniques into gaming, wouldn't it make sense just to tax them as gambling companies and not as technology companies, as it's happening today? And I think that this is not only about King or Candy Crush, it's about pretty much all the different kind of technology companies that are around that are qualified or classified as that, but they are actually not. Shouldn't they be classified specifically for the taxes they should pay as for the business they are doing? I mean.
Well, yes, in a word. I mean,
it was more a statement, sorry.
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, what they're doing is gambling by another name. And the problem is that the policy and regulatory definitions of gambling haven't caught up with the real world, and they need to change. I mean, in the UK, the Gambling Commission are redefining what gambling means, because since they passed the 2005 Act, what gambling actually involves has changed so much that it doesn't really apply anymore. But it's a difficult process, and it involves lawyers and researchers and academics and policymakers, and at the moment they're in a real mess. They've got a definition that nobody wants and that doesn't work at all. But eventually, yeah, they'll get there, and when they've done that, they can treat these companies as they treat gambling companies, and more importantly, regulate them, because it's not just tax that's being evaded at the moment. These companies can't be regulated because what they're doing isn't gambling, and there are no regulatory limits on gaming companies.
Maybe what I was trying to say is not only about taxes, but also how they are presented to the people. What I mean is, if Facebook will when you go to the Facebook page and you will see they say pretty much like we are a social media. If you will know that they are an advertising platform, we are an advertising platform, that will be different. I mean, if you start playing one of these games and they tell you like we are a gaming company, but they will present themselves as we are a gambling company, that already makes some kind of difference, I guess?
Oh, I think it would make a huge difference if people knew that. I mean, until I started to look into this, I had no idea to the extent that Facebook were also a business platform and a platform for monetizing all kinds of products. I mean, I didn't know that, and I'm sure a lot of people don't. And that this is how this is their business model. Well, one aspect of it. So yeah, I mean, public perceptions are hugely important, and so.
Great, love to agree. And last for Giuseppe, you were telling us about a story of, I think it was you, about the children that parents were dropping them late to school, and the parents had to pay a fine every time children were late, and how that didn't work. What will be like the right approach to solve that, actually? Maybe the three of you can give answers.
Well, in that study, what they found was that rather than appeal to what was essentially an economic incentive, a negative incentive in this case, so you pay because you're late, they used social norms to make parents. So what they did was essentially make public the names of the children that were late, so that essentially there was was an experiment. So they essentially they used the community pressure, or in this case the school community pressure of other parents on the parents that they were late. So
that sounds like bullying a little bit.
No, it's name and shame. Naming and shame.
Bullying.
Well, the idea there is that if you are doing something that is impacting, in this case, the community as the way how it works, so the cost of being late is not paid by you, but the other children as well, then it's something that, I mean, this is done in many cases. I mean, to make more responsible the person that, in this case, the parents. That example was just an example to show the fact that anytime you intervene with some kind of regulation or policy, you have embedded into it an implicit model of how people act and behave. And if that is not matching with actually how people behave, that policy is doomed to fail or to produce even adverse effects, so the contrary of what you wanted to. Okay? I can give you another example that is less, let's say, children-based and potentially controversial. Typical example is of this sort of situation is that you remember, most of us, I guess, given the age of all of us, you remember that there was a time where a lot of people were pushed to use energy-saving bulbs. Okay, the bulbs, you know, they put the, I don't know how it's in Spanish, bulbs, but lampadinas.
No, that's Italian.
No, lampadinas. the Italian word with just a S at the end. So the point was, okay, we use energy-saving bulbs because it's good for the environment. Okay. The effect was, not everywhere, but in some cases, that people kept the lights on more because they had energy-saving bulbs.
Licensing.
Exactly. This is an effect that has been studied before. It's called the licensing effect. That means that when I've done something good, I feel entitled to be a bit more relaxed. Typical example of a diet.
Yeah.
You know, I've had a salad today, so this evening I can have a huge plate of jamon and queso, whatever. And obviously it defeats the purpose of the entire... So what happened with the energy-saving bulbs? Well, people were keeping the lights on much longer than they used to, because now we have the energy-saving bulbs. So at the end, the outcome, the consumption at the end was higher than before.
Yeah.
So this is because, again, you have to understand how people think and take decisions in order to understand how you can harmonize the issue of, in this case, consumption. Okay? It's just not enough to provide one line of intervention.
Thank you very much for a very interesting seminar for the three of you.
Other
So linked to this licensing effect, I wanted to ask about the labels on the cars, the energy efficiency. How is that then? Did you have results of how that is impacting? And is that also having this kind of effect? Like if you have an electric car, you might as well have two. It's positive for the environment, when in the end it's still using a lot of traditional resources to make the cars and high emissions to make these electric cars. So.
Yeah, I skipped that because basically, but it's good to also tell story of that are not successful, because let me go back to the sorry, well, no, it's okay. I know, I removed, I don't have it here. Okay. They were not effective. They were not effective. We found almost no systematic effect of this label, either on the willingness to pay for an electric car or for cars that are energy efficient, because we tried to use two nudges. One was on the environment, the emission, but we also put information about how much gallon per year you spend, so to combine also the utilitarian aspect. But they did not work because, and our explanation is that they were not really nudged. They were labeled with some color, but there were a lot of information to be processed. So in the end, we think that it was like eating system 2. It required too much cognitive processing by the individual. So we had only very mild effect, very little effect in, for instance, in increasing willingness to pay for electric car or hybrid car. So that's what happened.
Because basically what they asked us was to reframe the information that was available in the labels so that they would look more important to people. So for example, if you buy this car, you save X amount of money in less petrol in a year and so on. What we found was another also important issue, that most people declare that when they buy a car, it's not an individual decision. In most cases, it's a family decision. So what you have into account is not only information about the car, but there are all sorts of variables related to the use of the car that are related to the family that also play an important role. And they tend to prevail at the moment. I mean, we have seen also in other cases, essentially environmental information, although it's growing in importance, is still not, it doesn't match the other kind of information, well, not information, but the other, if you want, variables, the impact, the choice of people. So, and for cars in particular, you have this idea that, it's something you buy for many uses. So it's very difficult to just pin down to a few type of information in a label.
Also what we found out, but not through the experiment, but through the survey, is that basically the purchase is a two-step process. Let's say, first, I decide what type of car, and let's say I decide a SUV, a big car. Then, after that, maybe among all the big cars, I choose the one that is less emission. But the emission is not the priority. I want that type of car. I want a 500, I want a Mini, I want a big car. Then, as a secondary element, within that big category, maybe I'm going to choose the one that is electric. But it's not the primary choice. It's not the primary. Sorry.
Yeah, that might change in the future with the new Teslas and so. Okay.
I have a question about your book. You mentioned science for sale. That's how.
who do you want to sell it to? Which kind of industries do you believe that so far are buying science and behavioral economics, and they are already using it? What kind of industries should more buy it in the future?
I answer you in a different way. For every dollar that trade unions spend on evidence to negotiate, industry spend 34. So evidence now has become the currency of lobbying, okay? Because many times the policymakers do not even have the information, and so there is an exchange between the lobbyist and the policymaker, and the lobbyists provide information. So there is a total asymmetry of power, because any industry can buy much more evidence than any association of consumer or single individual. So there are several industries that buy evidence, and it's not necessarily a wrong thing. You know, if you commission a study and the study is done, as long as the methodology is transparently illustrated, there's nothing illegitimate there. But it should be clear to everyone that decisions are taken in a way that is influenced by evidence that is produced by a third party. It's not a neutral. This is why in our book we argue that maybe we should have a sort of system that is similar to the adversarial system in the courts, where one part brings one evidence, the other part brings the other evidence, and then there is an interaction between the parts and the policymaker. At this moment, there is a possibility of regulatory capture, meaning that when the policymaker listens only to some interest and not all the interest.
Right.
Thank you. It's just a thought. From the regulator point of view, Cristiano, you said that auto-regulation is not effective. Sometimes regulation is needed. I was just wondering, we are living in at times where technologies are really fast, are really changing. And I think that sometimes it seems to me that when the regulator makes the regulations, the laws born already old or become old really fast. And that's, I think, it's a little bit the limit of the regulations. Institutions, European institutions, national governments are not so fast as industries are, because industries have the evidences, have the need of be fast and quick. So in this case, auto-regulations has still, I think, an effective meaning to, in order to put limits in this issue. I am in favor of regulations, but I wonder how we can go through this limit of the timing.
So if I can summarize, yes. The question is that because technology moves very fast and it's difficult for laws and regulation to follow, maybe self-regulation by the industry could be a solution, because in a way, you know, the industry accept to adopt some practices, and you do not have to follow technological advances through new laws every day. Is this is the question?
Or a part of a solution, or you will have to make laws every year, for instance.
Well, I tell you, I give you my answer, and then I also think for the gambling industry, it's such a case that Gerda can give you hers. For instance, words are important. We were talking about before about the fact that you name Facebook as a social media, or you name it as an advertising company. So in the UK, the courts have established that Uber is a transportation company, is not a technology company. So sometimes this is also a rhetoric that technology move fast and law cannot stay behind. Because in that case, it's very easy. Even a elementary school boy would see that this entity is allowing people to use car and be transported. So it's not a technology company, it's a transportation company and should respect the regulation of transport. In the same way as it's easy to see that the people working for Foodora or for Uber are not contractors but are employee. And so the labor law should apply. So to some extent, I think that this fact that technology change fast and law cannot stay behind is exaggerated. And it's a card that has been played by all these technology giants in their lobbying activity. On the other hand, is also true. Every once in a while I read some article of law and technology, and it's sometimes difficult to follow. So self-regulation can be a solution, but then poses another problem, which is how to monitor whether or not they are compliant. Because, for instance, when we did the study on online kids, some big platforms say, no, but we are against all of this. And we say, well, but look at this game. How we can control the app developer that puts game in our platform? Who controls this? Who is responsible? So self-regulation has also its problem, not only regulation.
I mean, it's true that technology moves fast, but as Cristiano pointed out, that can be a useful smokescreen to hide behind. It's like, oh, the technology is too fast, we can't possibly keep up. Technology is fast, but policymakers and regulators are also very slow, so they need to speed up too. And it can be done, because with the example of the gambling industry, when they fail to live up to the regulatory standards that are current at the moment, they're fined very, very quickly, in a matter of weeks. So that can be executed quite quickly. So I think there's a rhetoric of speed of technology, pace of policy change, and I think they need to come together a little bit and maybe be more honest about what could feasibly be done in the policy arena. There's a certain lack of will, a certain complacency.
Just two very quick thing. The first thing is, in my experience, self-regulation was implemented only under the threat of regulation. So companies saw that something was moving, and they said, okay, we better self-regulate, because otherwise they will come and regulate us, heavily. So in that respect, I think at least the threat of regulation still is important. The second point is that I think there is an issue with regulation itself, in the sense that the way our policy is made is often done in a way that is done once and not monitored and kind of updated, if you want, through the process. This is a debate that is very, very much happening about the fact that the way our policy is developed and then implemented, it should be as a sort of constant way of looking how any policy really is performing, so the evaluation of the policy while it's being implemented, and the possibility of reforming it. So it's not impossible to think about policy that can be implemented at one point in time, then reviewed, updated, and so on. So just because it's not being done doesn't mean it's impossible to do it.
Okay, so actually we have behind schedule. We went behind our time, so it's 1:45, and so very happily we can close. It was very interesting, and thank you very much.
you.